Can your muscles be so strong that they fracture your own bones? How strong is a sumo wrestler's thrust? And what is the science behind creating an afterimage that's seen in so many different anime? Well guys, we'll be looking at all these questions and so much more as I break down one of the fight scenes in Season 2 of Record of Ragnarok. Now, I already know that it's probably not as liked to show as Baki, Hajime no Ippo and other fighting anime, but there's still some fun to be had and some science to be broken down in the fight between Raiden and Shiva. So, with that being said, if you're ready, let's begin.
Sumo no gishiki ka.
Okay, so first up, what's up with throwing salt into the arena? Well, salt tossing is a sacred practice in sumo wrestling as it's thought to ward off evil spirits and is considered as a prayer ritual to protect fighters from injury. The physiological benefit of wiping your hands with salt is that it helps to relieve sweaty palms, which will allow the sumo wrestlers to get a tighter grip on their opponents. Also, if it's sprinkled over the floor and you happen to fall, it can have a mild antiseptic effect on any open injuries.
史上最強力士の初手は四十八手ではなく飛び蹴りから始まった。
Oh, so starting off with a drop kick to the face. Here we'd probably be looking at facial fractures to the extent that they might cause a cave-in in the face. Of course, this is the worst form of facial fracture. What I want to know is how do you safely land after a kick like this without dangerously injuring yourself?
3歳になるっちゅうのにまだ立たんずら。普通なら1歳やそこらで立つだに。どうすりゃいいんかの。
Okay, so here we get a glimpse into Raiden's past and we find out that by the age of 3 he still hadn't started walking. Now this is quite bizarre because most babies start walking between 10 and 18 months. Now as a doctor, the types of things I think about in a child who's got delayed walking is whether they've got a neurological condition, an issue with the joints, or a group of conditions called muscular dystrophies. Now it's this final group of conditions that can lead to a weakness in your general muscle tone and muscle strength.
生まれて初めて立ち上がった太郎吉は両足と両腕あばらを骨折強すぎる筋肉の圧が骨を粉砕したのだ
Oh god, so muscles so strong that they were able to collapse and cause fractures of his bones. And I bet you're wondering whether something like this is possible. Well, let's think about it. Muscles are attached to bones and they're done so by tendons, and depending on where they attach to the bone will dictate the movement you get from that limb. So let's say theoretically you had obscene muscle growth and super strong tendons. Theoretically, yes, it could crush your bones. But from what we know about Raiden, although he has super strong muscles, there's no mention about super strong tendons, so I would suspect that the tendons would ping off before they fractured any bones. To be honest, the first time I saw the scene, the first thing that came to mind when I saw him fracture his legs was that he was suffering from something like a brittle bone disease such as osteogenesis imperfecta. This would be a far more realistic condition to have rather than the reason that was given.
いつしか太郎吉の肉体は暴れる筋肉を抑え込むまさに殻とも言える新たな筋肉を作り出したいわく百兵
Okay, so muscles to restrain muscles, almost teaching them to protect yourself. And this is really interesting because many sumo wrestlers suffer from shoulder dislocations from throwing their opponents out of the ring. And it's because of this common injury that one of the most famous sumo wrestlers out there decided to change his training to try to combat this problem. He argued that rather than taking 6 months out of training to have surgery on his shoulder, he would mix up his training routine, where he would include weight training to help strengthen up his shoulder girdle muscles. And I bring this up because he claimed that the goal of his training was to develop muscular armour, much like the 100 seals that we see in this scene. What an obscene size he's blown up to be. So I don't know exactly what he's twisting there, but I'm assuming that he's doing it to unleash his 100 seals, allowing him to access his full strength potential. and it looks like he's practically doubled in size thanks to these muscles he's been hiding. Now, although sumo wrestlers are obscenely large and powerful, consuming up to 13,000 calories a day, the average man can probably only put on about 40 to 50 pounds of muscle throughout their lifetime if done naturally. So probably the conclusion to be had is the majority of that weight is just going to be fat. Oh gosh, a clothesline injury like this is definitely going to cause some laryngeal damage. And to explain the impact of this, let's imagine your airway as a flexible tube. So here is your airway encased by skin, found within which are all the other tissues. Now let's say you take a blow to this area. It can cause swelling and damage to the tube itself, as well as the surrounding skin and the other tissues in this area. This will subsequently narrow the diameter of the tube, being your airway, and make it much harder for you to breathe. And let's say you take that blow around the area of your voice box, you can better appreciate how this might impact the sound of your voice. Oh gosh, and a direct headbutt as we see blood trickle down his forehead. Now we've got to remember that the tissues of the forehead are quite vascular, so a direct blow to this area that causes a laceration will cause this area to bleed quite profusely. This can blind your opponent and can sometimes result in a stoppage in any fight. On the other hand, if this doesn't cause a laceration, it can cause quite a significant hematoma, some of which we've seen during MMA battles. Oh god, this is one of the worst Chinese burns I've ever seen. And for those that don't know what a Chinese burn is, it's where you apply opposing pressure in different directions on the wrist to try to induce a friction burn. But you know, this kind of injury reminds me of the notorious vice grip strength of Hanayama from the Baki series. And I think it's pretty clever the way they've depicted the swelling of the forearms before he executes this move, because it's mainly your forearms combined with your hand muscles that help you to develop grip strength.
今のライデンはベルンドによってもともと制御不能であった暴れ筋肉を自由自在に使える。こいつはすげえな。
This is muscle flexing to the maximum. But you know, this character design kind of reminds me of a combination of Trunks from Dragon Ball Z, Luffy's ability to blow up his limbs from One Piece, as well as this muscle guy from My Hero Academia. I don't know, let me know what you think.
予測不能なリズムによる絶え間ない連撃。ライデンにしてみれば何人もの相手から攻撃を受けている心境でしょう。
But it is interesting how he's making an after image of himself so that it looks like he's fighting multiple opponents. But is there an after effect image like this that's possible? Well, if you wave your hand in front of your face back and forth, you see a blur along with a few too many fingers, which I think is responsible for this after image effect. And the reason that optical illusion happens is down to the speed at which your eyes can work and the way your brain processes that information. You can understand it as your brain and eyes operating at a certain amount of frames per second, a bit like a computer screen. You see, your eyes operate on something called a flicker fusion threshold, and this is around 75 Hz. Now this level is dictated by the cones and rods within your eyes being able to regenerate within a certain amount of time. Anything that moves quicker than this rate will appear blurred in your vision. So basically, when you see a real object moving in front of you really quickly, your brain tries to connect the dots because it can't process the frame rate, and it tries to create a nice smooth motion. However, the outcome is that you get motion blur or an after image where there might appear to be more fingers than there are on your hands. This effect of additional fingers is further compounded by your hands stopping for a second at the furthest left part of a wave and then the furthest on the right part of the wave too. So relating all of this to this fight between Raiden and Shiva, we see Shiva darting across from left to right of Raiden's visual field, and he's doing this extremely quickly. This might be quick enough to generate ghost-like figures, which in the anime community and anime world we would refer to as an after image. So, a kick so hot, not only does it burn through Raiden's 12-pack, but it also cauterizes the wound on its way through. Now, the thing about scarred or burnt tissue is that the skin becomes really inflexible. In fact, it tightens around all the underlying structures, such as the muscles, blood vessels, and nerves. Now, this can become so dangerous that it actually cuts the blood supply off to any limb beyond that burn, causing a condition called compartment syndrome. Now, if something like this occurs, you actually need to cut through that scarred bit of tissue to allow the tissues to be released from that pressure, allowing blood supply to flow again. Nasty stuff, I know.
久しぶりだな。思う存分相撲をやるのは。
So here we see Raiden doing the classical sumo stomp. But why do they even do this? Well, sumo wrestlers raise their legs in this way for a variety of reasons. And one of the most important reasons they do this is to shift their weight and also to gain leverage in their stance. This allows them to keep their balance and to move forward quickly whilst pushing against an opponent. Another reason is to gain momentum so that they can throw their opponent out of the ring. And lastly, they do this almost as a show of dominance to try to intimidate and scare off their opponents. Oh god, okay, so with one of those palm blows, he's amputated some of Shiva's arms. Now there's no doubt that sumo wrestlers are incredibly strong. They have quite an intense training regimen where they practice these thrusts daily. For example, in some bouts they literally have to pick up their opponents and throw them out of the ring. And some of these opponents could weigh in excess of 350 pounds. So it's realistic that these thrusts might cause bruises or at worst broken bones, but to completely amputate someone's arm, I think is a bit unrealistic. So, his thrust broke the sound barrier. I think we're starting to get into the territory of Yojiro Hanma. But thinking about it now, if that thrust had broken the sound barrier, it would have had to have created a sonic boom effect. Which might explain now how Shiva's arms got blown off.
反動です。筋肉を超速移動させるあの技は通常ではありえない負荷が全身にかかる。それに耐えきれず。
Oh god, that recoil looks painful. It looks like his muscles and tendons are tearing apart. But this recoil kind of reminds me of those weightlifters who put too much weight on the bar and end up snapping off their tendons. Probably the main ones that people are familiar with are with bicep tears or pec tears. These are often incredibly painful and require urgent surgery to reattach the tendon to the bone. And even after this, people need a long-term rehabilitation to get back the function they once had.
限界の向こう側まで上げるぜ。
Of course, he has a further trick up his sleeve. He can force his heart to beat faster and harder. And we've spoken about this before in the JoJo's Bizarre Adventure anime, where Jotaro had to restart his heart when fighting Dio, as well as in the Baki series, where they performed cardiac massage to revive Dopa Orochi. And likewise in this scene, Shiva is performing this cardiac massage. Now this was something that was actually performed on patients who'd had a cardiac arrest during heart surgery to try to maintain a blood supply to the brain and the rest of the body. And the way that this would be helping Shiva is that by causing the heart to contract harder and faster, you're causing a greater blood supply full of nutrients and oxygen to get to the muscles. The only downside to this is if you've got open injuries that are actively bleeding, as the greater contraction will cause you to bleed out far quicker.
燃え尽きるまで
Okay, and this release has also set him ablaze. And this red coloration and the fact that he's on fire, I'm sure is to depict the greater amount of work that the heart is doing and the fact that the muscles are going into overdrive. It's funny, it kind of looks very similar to the release form that we see in the Kenghan Ashura characters too. Oh god, he's actually so hot in this scene that he's completely carbonizing his muscles. Now what this means to a doctor is that he's likely got 3rd degree burns, whereby the burn has penetrated all the way down to the bone. That means no muscle, no nerves, and no blood vessels. And that's a classical feature of 3rd degree burns. They tend to be far less painful than 2nd or 1st degree because you've completely lost your nerve supply. Oh god, that is gruesome. Oh goodness. Well, at least they both gave it up their all with their final moves. But to be honest, I really don't know how to describe this type of injury. I think the only thing that I've seen that's similar is what we would call a degloving injury. And this commonly occurs where people have had their wedding ring pulled off of their finger and it's pulled off all the skin and the underlying tissue with it. Now, in those scenarios, the only way to salvage that tissue and skin is by having microvascular surgery, and it would have to be done urgently. In this case, however, I think he's degloved far too much of that limb for it to be repairable.
ありがとな思う存分わしの相撲が取れた最後の最後まで膝をつかなかった
Oh god! And so to finish off this warrior, he's decapitated him. Goodness me, the second part of this fight was far more gory than I expected. But what I can say is that the anime is definitely an upgrade from the season 1. Wow guys, we've covered a lot today, and to be honest, I'm pretty exhausted. Now, if you've enjoyed today's video and you want to see more, why not check out one of these 2 videos? Otherwise, leave any anime recommendations that you'd like an expert opinion on down below in the comments and I'll try and check them out. Otherwise, thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks.